I'm Rich Degner. I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa Pork Producers, and the Iowa Pork Producers leadership over the years have really focused on exports and recognizing the importance that exports play in the role of the pork producers in the United States and the impact that it has on profitability. I'm going to go ahead and introduce, announce the three speakers, and we'll let them transition through the presentation today. So starting out will be Becca Hendricks. Becca is the Assistant Vice President of International Marketing for the National Pork Board. Becca serves as the primary pork checkoff staff resource on all international marketing issues. We also have Lori Hinke, who is the Director of International Trade Policy, Sanitary, and Technical Issues at the National Pork Producers Council in Washington, D.C. And then the third speaker today will be Dermot Hayes, and Dermot is the Pioneer Hybrid International Chair in Agribusiness. He's Professor of Economics and Professor of Finance at Iowa State University, and I think it's important to point out that since 1995 he's been a consulting trade economist for the National Pork Producers Council. So with that, I will introduce Becca.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks everybody for being here today. Glad to have you. No, we're not excited about getting more rain, but at least it gave us an opportunity to all get together today. So quickly, I'm going to go through just a little update on what's going on in the world market, what's going on for U.S. exports, and then transition it over to Lori and Dermot to give you a little bit more specifics about some trade access issues. As you're all aware, the U.S. is the top exporter in the world, and that is second to the EU as of last year, surpassed the EU as of last year. Exports account for 27% of pork and pork variety meat production in the U.S. This increase is due to producers' dedication, our marketing promotion efforts, and, of course, greater access to greater markets. This chart overlays the success in exports and the increase over time with the free trade agreements that we've embarked on. In the next year, the industry has a chance to negotiate two very large trade agreements. One, the Trans-Pacific Partnership with 11 different countries, and one, the Transatlantic Investment Partnership with the EU. In 2012, the U.S. beat our previous record of exports with $6.3 billion in sales, which was up 3.5% from the year before, and about 5 billion pounds of product, which is up slightly from the year before. We exported to over 115 countries last year. However, in the first quarter of 2013, exports have been down, as you might have read in the news. This is due to a lot of trade hurdles that we've encountered, and Lori's going to speak about those next. However, exports equate to about $55 a head back to producers, and a lot of the products that we export are products that we're not accustomed to eating here, but are traditional in other diets around the world. The partners in international trade on behalf of U.S. pork producers are listed here. The National Pork Board, which I'm staff at the Pork Board, represents or conducts trade research, education, and promotion. The National Pork Producers Council, which Lori represents, advocates for international trade policy and negotiations on behalf of the industry. Also, the U.S. Meat Export Federation is our marketing and promotion arm around the world. They have 103 representatives around the world working to promote pork in market. And also our state organizations like Iowa Pork Producers Council. As we're serving our trade partners, these are the things that we like to tout as an industry. We provide consistent, high-quality, nutrient-dense meats. We have unparalleled food safety systems. We have a reliable, versatile supply of product. We promote market development and education within markets. We have transparent, responsible producers. And we have good collaboration with industry, from packers to government to producers. Now I'm going to switch it over to Lori to talk about some of the access issues.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lori Hinke. I'm on staff with the National Pork Producers Council in Washington, D.C. My primary role is to address technical and sanitary barriers to trade that other countries erect that inhibits the ability of U.S. pork producers in the industry to export our product. We are, as Becca mentioned, the advocacy arm for the U.S. pork industry, both for domestic and international policy. We use science-based trade in order to rationalize and develop strategy to address these barriers in other markets, and we'll give some specific examples about those as we go. We work to ensure that we are setting policy decisions that will improve the producer's bottom line and ensure we can move more product out of the United States. In order to set policy for the industry, we work with subject matter experts like Dr. Dermot Hayes to ensure that the markets that we are working to achieve greater access, validate and justify the resources with animal health and food safety experts to ensure that the animal health questions or barriers to trade that other countries put up, we can justify the removal of those barriers. Many countries erect these artificial or unscientific barriers. Sometimes we call those SPS, sanitary phytosanitary barriers. For our product. Examples of those, there's many examples. PRRS is one of those. There are several countries around the world that use the excuse of PRRS as a reason not to import U.S. pork and pork products or to limit the ability to import U.S. pork and pork products. Not because there's a true food safety or animal health reason, but because they're trying to limit the amount of product going into the market and protect their domestic production. Another example is trichina. We have a list of countries around the world that require trichina risk mitigation as a condition for market access. Trichina is a parasite that we do not have in the U.S. commercial herd. We have actually negligible risk for this particular parasite, but it's a barrier that other countries say, okay, well, in order to limit the amount of product that we're receiving in our market and increase your costs, we are going to require that you freeze or test or somehow further process your product to limit your access. And this particular parasite is only transmitted through infected wildlife, like nose-to-nose contact with feral pigs. So obviously feral pigs are a concern, and uncooked infected pork product. Countries that set up these SPS barriers to trade are actually in violation of the trade rules that they sign up to when they become part of the World Trade Organization. And so we advocate very strongly that countries, including the United States, adopt science-based standards for conditions of trade. Becca mentioned two trade agreements. The first that we're going to chat about is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Very, very exciting agreement. Several years ago, it started out as only 4 countries in the Asia-Pacific region. It has now reached 11 strong country membership, including the United States. And Japan's almost official, there in parentheses, will be joining the TPP shortly. They've requested to come in. The other countries that are in the TPP have said, yep, sounds good, but there's still a formal process that needs to take place. This is a very, very exciting agreement for us because it targets a region of the world that is the fastest growing economic region, the Southeast Asia region, and it also sets up a framework for adding more countries to the agreement. So as I mentioned earlier, it started out as 4 countries, which did not include the United States. And, look 4, 5, 6, 7 years later, we now have an agreement with nearly 12 countries and other countries looking to join. The exciting part about this agreement is that, one, we can reduce the tariffs on U.S. pork and pork products, which means if you eliminate the taxes, it makes your product, U.S. pork, more competitive in these markets. We're already the #1 low-cost producer in the world, and this improves our competitiveness in these markets. It also addresses non-tariff issues, these SPS barriers, which are the significant barriers in this region of countries. So, for example, Australia, they have the most stringent, one of the most stringent requirements related to PRRS. Chile, they have a Trichina risk mitigation requirement. New Zealand, they also have a PRRS requirement. You kind of go down the line, and you see that the TPP provides leverage for the U.S. to negotiate and remove these barriers so we can export more product into these countries. We hope that we will reach agreement by the end of this year. That's the goal. That's kind of the marching orders that the Obama administration has given the negotiators. But due to Japan's very recent inclusion into the agreement, it's certainly a game changer. Japan is our #1 value market, #2 volume market for U.S. pork and pork products. And so by bringing them in, they represent a significant opportunity for increased market access, not only for U.S. pork, but also for other sectors in the United States and the other countries participating in the TPP. So very, very exciting that Japan will be shortly joining the TPP. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP. Someone apparently is in love with the letter T here. This is something that has just recently gotten kicked off. This may be the first time you hear about it. It certainly won't be the last. This is really a historic agreement between two of the world's largest economies, which are both struggling economically right now. The agreement will be between the United States and the 27 member countries of the European Union. If you've ever tried to do business or do anything in Europe to get agreement from 27 different countries with 27 different cultures and languages and this, that, and the other, you know it's going to be a pretty heavy lift. So it's very exciting. It's a tremendous opportunity. We expect negotiations to actually start the second week of July in Washington, D.C. We do have some significant barriers to trade for U.S. pork into the European market, including some TRQs, tariff rate quotas, and other tariffs, a ban on the use of ractopamine. They have a requirement for mitigation of trichina, and as I mentioned earlier, again, there's negligible risk, according to trichina experts and our own Center for Disease Control. They prohibit the use of something called pathogen reduction treatments. The EU makes the case that these are unsafe, and actually the U.S. industry and other pork industries use these in order to enhance the safety and reduce the pathogen load on products moving out of the United States, domestically or internationally. And the EU also has a very onerous plan approval process. So there's a lot of issues that we have on the table right now that we view the TTIP, as an opportunity to engage, remove these barriers to trade, and export more U.S. pork to a country that consumes a significant amount of pork. Just to put it in perspective, right now the U.S. only exports an equivalent of 0.25% of total EU pork consumption. Okay, and this is one of the largest pork consuming regions, groups of countries in the world. So the opportunity there is tremendous. We should be selling a lot more product into that market, but it's going to be a tough negotiation. A real historic negotiation. We're really looking forward to getting it kicked off in July. Wanted to touch on two countries, Russia and China. Russia recently implemented a ban on all imports of pork, beef, and poultry earlier this year. There's no science-based reason for them to have actually required pork from the U.S. to show that ractopamine, or Paline rather, was not used in pork production, and we're working with our government to reopen that market at a commercial level to move product back into that market. China, you certainly can't talk about trade without talking about the potential for the opportunity of the exports of U.S. pork and pork products to the Chinese market. China is our largest potential market and really the future of the U.S. pork industry. They have had a ban on ractopamine for many years. They've recently required a third-party verification, which ultimately had a chilling effect on exports. Some exports are resuming back into that market, but it still sets a level of volatility and uncertainty for our industry working with China. Wanted to just list here some of the countries with specific trichina restrictions. Many of the countries are associated with the European Union, 27 countries, and other countries around the world that have this requirement. And if you see all these countries, you can probably, calculate in your head that that's a lot of product that we're not selling to other customers around the world. So I'll hand it over to Dermot to talk about a little bit more about his research.
Thanks, Laurie. I'm going to make a few general comments about trade and then talk specifically about one of the obstacles that Laurie mentioned, trichina barriers. The general comments about trade, you would have noticed this spring when we had disappointing news on the export markets, as we've just heard. The futures prices for live hogs fell by about $10 a hundredweight or $20 an animal. And what that shows you is that how sensitive the markets are to these trade opportunities. The good news is when we expand markets by doing the kind of work that Laurie and Becca do, prices go up, at least in the short term, and then that gives the industry an opportunity to expand. But when we lose markets, the opposite happens. And the logic is that the U.S. domestic market is big and balanced, and we have good information about how many sows there are. Consumers have kind of steady habits, and as a result, that market the futures markets are predictive of what will happen, but you can really set that whole balance off with a little movement on the export side, and I'll focus in on one potential movement, and that is solving some of these trichina issues and talk about how that would impact exports and ultimately prices. The other thing I've been saying since I got to Iowa State in 1986, it's a lot more efficient to move pork around than it is to move feed grains. So if the world were completely a free trade zone, the U.S. would not export corn or soybeans to feed livestock in other countries. The livestock would be produced here in the Midwest, especially in the areas where the manure has value. So there's hey Max, sorry, should I speak a little bit louder? Okay, especially in areas where the manure has value. Now I'm going to move on to a research project I did. As Laurie mentioned, there are a couple of ways to get rid of a trichina barrier. One would be to talk to other countries and say that you should accept our product, and because it's trichina free, and that success has happened in Colombia. The other way would be for the industry, the domestic industry, to bear the costs of a program to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is no trichina in the U.S. commercial herd. We know it's true, but proving it is another issue. And so the question is that I'm going to look at is what would happen if we could achieve success in one of those two forces to try and get rid of this particular barrier. And the success would be convincing other countries or convincing our own USDA that the herd is free. So the first thing you'll realize quickly about trichina is the way you test it is different for frozen and chilled pork. So my whole presentation is going to have to separate out the two different types of product. I'm also going to have to focus in a lot on where we can export chilled pork and where we can export frozen pork, because the barriers are different, and so the costs associated with those barriers are different for different countries, depending on how far away they are in terms of whether we could even ever export chilled or frozen pork. And then I'm going to show you some country-specific data and give you a sense for the costs that the industry bears, and therefore the benefits we would incur if we got rid of this particular barrier. I know a lot of you in the audience, and I know there's a lot of skill out there, especially related to this issue. We're going to have time for questions and comments, and I haven't finished this study yet. And if you have corrections or advice on how what I'm about to say next, please let me know, because I need to get it done over the weekend. So I'm going to start with an example using frozen product first. So an exporter meets a customer who said, I want to buy some frozen picnics. And I needed to be Trichina certified. That is, one of the countries listed is asking to buy a U.S. product, and they need a Trichina certificate to get it in across the border. Our USDA will provide that certificate under a certain condition, and that is somebody has to monitor that pork was frozen in the U.S. in a facility where it could be monitored and therefore meet time and temperature requirements that are long enough to guarantee that the meat is frozen long enough to kill the trichina. Then you put a label on the box, and that's your certificate. And that costs, depending on the company and that you're working with, somewhere between 6 and 10 cents a pound. So there's a cost there. Now, a picnic might be worth, let's say, $1 a pound, and then you're incurring a cost as much as 10 cents. So that's a big barrier. And as you can imagine, if that was eliminated for some reason, then the cost of delivering the U.S. product goes down by as much as 10 cents or 10%, but there's no impact on the cost of other countries. The European price stays the same, the price of the domestic product stays the same, and when you get that situation where one producer drops their cost and the other producers do not, you get an extreme sensitivity and a lot of movement, and for about every 1% reduction in the U.S. delivered price, you get about a 3% expansion in exports. So on the frozen product, it's a pretty straightforward exercise. Chilled is a little bit more complicated. So let's go through the same example, but this time assume that the customer wants a chilled picnic. Now here, the plant has to, when you freeze, you can take any cut and freeze it, but if you want to do a test on a chilled product, you got to test the diaphragm of the carcass. And so what you're going to do is you get the export order, you go out, test the carcasses. What you're going to do is grab a sample from 100 animals, look for the larvae. If they're in there, then all 100 animals are prohibited from export. But of course, nobody ever finds the larvae, so generally it's going to be free. And there's a cost to that. It's about a penny a pound for the carcass, but you've also got to separate those animals as they move through the plant. What you're going to do is you're going to test a bunch of animals, and you want to make sure that the primals from those animals in the boning hall are kept separate. And the way to do that is to put a break in the line and then clear out the boning hall from the first set of animals, then bring the trichina tested animals through and keep those primals separate. And the industry average, best guess from the Meat Export Federation, is about 4.4 cents a pound. Now, is that a big deal? Do you guys think 4.4 cents is a big deal? Well, it is because of how the fact that you have to test at the carcass, and that's going to be the punchline. And the problem is that only the picnics are going to go to that export customer. The rest of the carcass is going to be sold to somebody who doesn't care whether it's tested or not, because the U.S. customer or the Japanese customer. So all the costs, all the 4.4 cents are going to be borne by the picnics, and that's where it gets expensive. So now I got to talk a little bit about who buys chilled and frozen product. Well, we can. In general, if you're exporting chilled product, it's going into a retail customer. They care, especially in Asia, where chilled pork or frozen pork is discounted relative to chilled pork. So, and then there's a whole other side of the market, the processing side, and they'll buy frozen pork, and they're perfectly happy to do that. So, if you want to get into the high-margin retail business, you need to be able to export chilled product. We cannot get chilled pork into every country. There's a kind of a shadow in the world where the travel distances are too long, and that shadow stretches from about South Africa across the southern Indian Ocean over to the Philippines. But the rest of the world, we can get chilled product to. And so the countries that we export chilled product right now are the big ones: Mexico, Canada, Taiwan, and South Korea, and of course Japan. And in theory, we could export to a lot of other countries, such as the EU, Russia, even China, all of Central and South America, if barriers were removed. Now the puzzle is, why is it that we are exporting chilled product to a limited number of countries, even though in theory we can get it to more? And it has to do in some cases with this need for kind of certification at the retail or level. So I'll go through the countries where the frozen issue is there, and then the chilled issue. Well, the frozen issue is there for every country, because processors in every country buy frozen pork because it suits them. But it's uniquely there for Kazakhstan, Singapore, South Africa, and Ukraine. We cannot get chilled product into those markets, so anything we would do is impacted by that need to certify that the meat has been frozen. The EU and Canada have mechanisms in place to provide pork into those markets without that additional cost. The EU has always tested, and Canada certifies that the meat is frozen while in transit, and as a result, it arrives. You count the time in transit as a contribution to the need for freezing, even though you don't do that. We don't do that in the U.S. The other issue is that importers in those countries prefer spot purchases rather than all the paperwork associated with the spot purchases from the EU, rather than the paperwork associated with getting a U.S. certificate and the time involved. I remember being in South Africa and talking to an importer, and he said, "There's no way I'm going to buy from the U.S. because I've got to put my money in to own that pork while it sits in there for a month, whereas if I buy the Canadian product, it flows directly to me without having to tie up cash." Okay, a little bit of data. There we got Singapore, and we're not Singapore has a Trichina requirement, frozen only. It adds to our cost, but not to others, and so our performance in the Singapore market is not nearly as good as it is in other markets where we don't have this requirement. That 10 cents or 10% a pound barrier is significant there. South Africa is really amazing. That country simply won't buy our product. They'll just buy it from Canada or Germany because of that need to certify the costs associated with it and the need to tie up money. So, and this market in particular, I think, has enormous opportunities if that restriction and the PRRS restriction could be removed. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the other side, chill market, and we have barriers in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Cuba, Colombia, Dominica, the European Union, Peru, and Russia. And the punchline is that, remember that 4.4 cents, which didn't seem like a big deal? If you only have to incur that cost on a portion of the animal that's equal to 1/10 of the total value, then you multiply up the impact of that. If the picnics are only 10% of the total value of the animal and they have to bear the cost of the 4.4 cents a pound, that's 44 cents a pound. That is big enough to keep you out of the market. Our cost advantage is not big enough to pay 44 cents a pound to do a Trichina test. And that's why we're not in a lot of these markets, because the barrier is more important than I think any of us realized. And so we have a competitive advantage in the retail side, but we can't get there until we get rid of that Trichina. Colombia, Colombia has traditionally, in its own domestic production, it uses chilled pork. But right now, we can only export frozen pork there. The frozen pork we export is going to be used for processing, but Colombia is unique in that they use almost all of the carcass in fresh form rather than for further processing. And that's because they have a single monopoly company that does all the processing, and the prices for processed pork are so high that nobody buys it. So it's a retail opportunity, but we can't access it until we get rid of the Trichina issue. But the day we do that, our product really flows into that country. It's worth about, my estimate, about $50 million. And the logic is their own domestic industry has incredibly high costs. We have a free trade agreement with that country, and we're the only country that has complete access. Colombia has a free trade agreement with Chile, but it's not. They don't get the duty free. They have a band of duties against Chilean pork, and Canada has a free trade agreement with Colombia, but it has a limit of 7,000 tons for the next 15 years. So the U.S. has a unique opportunity, and that barrier, if we can get it eliminated, would cause us to get easy access to an enormous retail opportunity. More than 40 million people who desperately want pork but can't get it from their domestic producers. So one single breakthrough, and it appears that the NPPC has achieved that breakthrough, then gets us a new opportunity with essentially 44 million new customers for U.S. pork. The punchline, Trichina certification reduces our market share for frozen pork in all countries. It reduces or eliminates us from competition in the retail side on chilled pork. And I have some numbers that I'm sharing with the industry as to what that total value of that would be. I can say that solving this problem would create a substantial increase in U.S. pork exports. And that, as I said at the beginning, every time we increase exports, we get this short-term increase in prices.
All right, thanks, Dermot. Not only in the United States have we made the case for negligible risk for trichina, we don't mitigate for it as a requirement in the domestic market because it's not there. It's not a food safety concern. We have over 40 million tests done domestically here since mid-late 90s from over 20 states in plus Canada with 0 positives. So, we're pretty confident we have negligible risk here in the U.S. But what is the impact of the international standards bodies on our ability to achieve that access that Dermot was talking about? So we in the United States have worked very closely with our USDA to make the case for negligible risk to our trading partners, but it's also very helpful when we have an international standard setting body like the World Organization for Animal Health, OIE, that says these are the international guidelines for how you can achieve negligible risk. The OIE had their general session last week in Paris where they approved a new chapter for the determination of a trichina status. And although we reached out to many countries around the world, we were unable to achieve a standard on trichina that would have been more of a cut and dry, clearly beneficial to the U.S. Instead, it took a more EU-like approach, European Union-like approach, and the final result of that report of that standard is a combination of audits and surveillance. While the U.S. was not opposed to that, here in the United States, we felt that a surveillance program would be the way to achieve and further justify to our trading partners the level of negligible risk. So the chapter went forward. It was adopted. It will remain amendable. We'll be able to continue to work on it and try and influence that process further. So really, what are the next steps? We have an international standard that countries can use to say, hey, we want you to meet the OIE standard. They can also accept what U.S. puts forward as justification for negligible risk. And by harmonizing the EU standard once it's finalized with what we're able to do here in the United States and the level of freedom in our own country, we'll be able to increase our ability to access markets, as Dermot had outlined earlier. Our pork organizations are going to continue to work with the OIE on behalf of our pork producers to try and achieve some amendments to the text. And there's just more work to be done in order to gain that negligible risk status according to the OIE and open new opportunities for our pork. And we've been working on this for years, and we're going to continue to work on it for years. It's not a short-term fix, but the payout for producers in the industry is huge and certainly worth the time and resources. So for you as producers, you're probably sitting there wondering, okay, well, bottom line it for me. What does this mean for me, my operation, my family, my profitability? And really, your role to continue to ensure food safety in a world where the U.S. global brand is really a safe, consistent, low-cost product. We have one of the highest animal health statuses for our herds in the world. And to continue that market access, which adds profitability to your bottom line, as Becca said, 27% of total U.S. pork production is exported to over 100 countries every year. We really encourage you to continue your role as producers by working with your veterinarian, participating in PQA Plus, and implementing those good production practices, maintaining strict biosecurity and strict rodent control, which are two of the primary pathways that this particular parasite can be transmitted. So I hope this gives you a good sense of what the industry is doing on a global scale in terms of opening additional market access through the TPP, through the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Framework with the EU, trying to remove those barriers to trade related to ractopamine and other non-scientific barriers, and specific to trichina. This has a potential to really impact the producer's bottom line and increase markets for U.S. Pork and pork products.